There is no longer any doubt that we are living through a period of climate change, as hurricanes, droughts, and floods are destroying people's lives, homes, and crops all around the world. I, however, remain optimistic. We do have a great opportunity to change the way we grow food and in return provide food security and health while at the same time significantly mitigating climate change. Most of us at this point are well aware that growing plants can sequester atmospheric carbon. Today I want to explain how this process works and what we're doing to cause it to not function properly. Most people may imagine the technology of carbon capture as large machines that will suck atmospheric carbon right out of the air and into some kind of stable form. However, when thinking about planetary scale issues, it's a good idea to start off with the question, what solutions does nature already provide to us? Introducing what is probably the most common enzyme on the planet Earth, rubisco. This enzyme is found in every plant and is estimated to make up the majority of all the protein found in plants. Its sole job is to actually capture CO2 from the atmosphere, essentially doing the same job as those carbon capture machines. This is of course part of the plant's process of photosynthesis. By utilizing the properties of water along with the energy provided by the sun, the plant can fix atmospheric carbon and in turn build up its body, the tree trunk, the bark, the plant's biomass, all made up of atmospheric carbon. You may begin to see how this argument will unfold from here, that by growing plants, we are well on our way to capturing atmospheric carbon and sequestering it away safely into the plant's biomass. When that plant inevitably decays, that carbon will then be sequestered in the soil. However, this is not the pathway in which the majority of soil carbon is built. Agriculture makes up 45% of the land use around the world. Humans grow a lot of plants for food, and yet we don't seem to be curbing our CO2 emissions. There is something more than just growing plant biomass as a means of sequestering atmospheric carbon. The cultural management practices used in growing the food we all consume matters more to soil carbon sequestration than the act itself of raising plant biomass. To understand how our management practices are interfering with soil's natural ability to sequester carbon, we must understand more about what the plant does with the carbon it captures and why it has evolved to use its own resources in such a way. The plant doesn't just use the carbon it captures to build its own body. A material amount of it is actually pumped out of its roots and into the soil in the form of sugars and proteins. This is referred to as plant root exudates. The plant is actually feeding the microbes in the soil so they can grow, multiply, and mine mineral nutrients required by the plant. In this way, the plant-microbe interaction is actually really valuable in aiding to the nutrition of a plant. Let's have a closer look at the roots of the plant and the soil aggregates to better understand what's going on here. You can see the root exudates, consisting mostly of simple sugars, being deposited into the soil matrix. Colonies of bacteria and fungi will start to multiply as they feed off the simple sugars. As they grow, they use enzymes to break down the rocks and pebbles in the soil into mineral nutrients required by the plant. However, there are two other effects occurring during this process. Microbes are transforming the simple sugars into other products which they excrete from their bodies, referred to as extracellular metabolites. These extracellular metabolites are shown as a black residue in this animation. These metabolites are mostly polysaccharides, and they perform the function of sticking your soil aggregates together to build soil structure. The extracellular metabolites, along with the bodies of the microbes themselves, all add up to generate humic substances, which are a key component in the soil's ability to hold on to nutrients. You can think of a soil microbe as an unseen extension of the plant's biomass, sequestering massive amounts of carbon. As the microbes are growing and multiplying, feeding off plant exudates, they are actually respiring CO2 in much the same way humans do. This CO2, being respired from an active soil, begins to rise up into the canopy of the plants growing above it. Consider how convenient it is that the canopy of plants actually have all their stomata, which allow the atmospheric carbon into the plant, on the underside of their leaves. In this way, they are ready to reaccumulate the CO2 being respired by the soil microbes below. Carbon is actually meant to be cycled and not become a one-way street through the plant and into the soil. Some microbes, such as fungi, are actually much more efficient at using carbon. That is, they can grow their biomass without respiring as much CO2. When the fungus dies, the carbon tied up in its body becomes stable. All this, along with the crop residue and the plant roots, add up to create a soil that is well physically structured, can hold lots of water, cycle nutrients, and be resistant to pests and disease. Every time this carbon cycle occurs in which the plant fixes the atmospheric carbon, puts it in the soil, the microbes feed off of it and respire it back, well, there is a little bit of carbon that never gets respired back. It remains in the soil. This is because the microbes continuously break down the carbon into forms that eventually become undecomposable by virtually all microbes, and thus it stays seemingly forever as sequestered carbon in the soil. All this is to say that when plants fix atmospheric carbon, they are not just using it for themselves. They are putting the carbon in the soil, and the only way it can stay in the soil is if there's a diversity of microbes ready to feed off that carbon. Although it's becoming a topic for another video, it suffices to say here that modern agriculture has done a pretty good job of ridding the soil of its native biology. Due to the persistent use of herbicide, fungicide, and insecticide, the microbiome of our cultivated soils is looking pretty bleak. Without this biology, we are not allowing growing plants to sequester atmospheric carbon into the soil. This is why we must adopt methods of regenerative agriculture and ensure that our practices are not actively killing soil biology. If we cannot restore the soil microbiome, half the green-growing plants on the earth will not be contributing to carbon capture, and that's a pretty big deal.